we have not done a podcast. I know that it's kind of old news to the baseball world now, but we have not done a podcast since the Javy Baez in Toronto incident where he hit a ball in the air for once and thought that it was a homer, was pimping it down the first baseline and was safe at second, but thought it was a homer, got a double out of it, and then forgot how many outs there were and got doubled off at second base. Tigers manager AJ Hinch benched him for the not one, but two mental mistakes in one. And this was the quote that Javy Baez had after the game. My mind is everywhere right now. I'm just trying to focus on my hitting and my timing. The only reason I lost the count of outs was because I was hitting sixth. I thought I was the third batter in that inning. That's the only reason. Anybody can make a mistake. At this point, the way we're playing and the way I'm playing, it's obviously going to be worse. If I'm hot and I have 7 homers and I make that same mistake, I would have stayed in the game, but I got no excuses. Outside of the fact that he said I would have remembered how many outs there were if I were hitting third instead of sixth. I did say this too. So Jay Hay had a tweet. He said, you can't overstate how weird it is that 2 of the 5 or 6 most important / popular players from just a few seasons ago and the signature guys on an iconic title team, Javy Baez and Chris Bryant, are completely and totally irrelevant in what should be their primes. So yes, like Javy Baez is an absolute afterthought. But that tweet, I sent out the tweet about Javy Baez. I said, Javy Baez is so checked out. Am I alone in thinking a change of scenery would revive his career? Over 1,000 replies and 4.1 million views. Like, for whatever reason, Javy Baez may be irrelevant from a playing standpoint, from a career standpoint, from a production standpoint, but he is still a relevant talking point in the league for whatever reason. I don't think that's just Cubs fans. I think that that's, baseball fans that saw that Cubs core finally win a championship in 2016. But man, what a significant fall off. And the whole thing about saying change of scenery, a bunch of the replies that I got were, he just got there. He's only been there for a year. I was like, yeah, I understand that, but you do 1 year in Detroit and tell me if that's a short amount of time.
Yeah, people love a fucking fall off, man. They love that. That's probably made him more fun to talk about, is him being bad. But I mean, you're right. I think that's one of the only players, you saying that, he would have been so much better on a good team, that I really believe that on. Because think about it, dude. He came up and played in one of the most legendary, most lit World Series ever, out of the gate. And then he played in Puerto Rico, got second in the WBC. This year he went off in the WBC in big games. But now, you forget outs when you're playing for one of the saddest teams there are right now.
Well, Javy Baez is supposed to be the dude there, right?
Yeah.
The guy.
Yeah.
The guy.
I think he was I think he was supposed to be the dude who got in the door, who led to an uptick and then other dudes, right? I think that was
right, but he was not that guy in Chicago. He had Chris Bryant ahead of him. He had Rizzo ahead of him. Jason Hayward ahead of him. He even had early, whether you like the dude or not, and what happened, and he's gone and off the face of the earth. But the fucking
Addison
Russell, thank you, who former Oakland A. But Addison Russell was supposed to come up and contribute and be this guy, right? So Javy Baez didn't have the weight of being who he is supposed to now be in Detroit. And that has a massive impact on how a guy wakes up in the morning, goes about his business, because there's days where if you're not the dude, you like that because you can just kind of blend in today. Today, I'm going to do things a little differently because I'm not Brizzo and co, and I don't have them up my ass. They're watching me do the cool, flashy shit, and that's what they like. But anything else, I don't have to be that guy.
On a winner, too, on a winner, a guy who can really pick it and who can play high level defense and good base running and all of that, but who's struggling offensively, like that can fit in within the context of a winner. It's much harder to watch that on a loser, where a guy like they don't need a high-end defensive shortstop. They needed a middle of the order bat. And to Jared brought up the tweet. The essence or the thinking behind the tweet, it's not just production that I'm talking about with Bryant and Baez, although that is part of it. It's also just their place within the landscape of baseball and where they were, because it doesn't matter if people want to misremember it now. They were some of the most popular players nationally in the game of baseball. I had a listener or a person on Twitter challenge me on this, saying that Bryant and Baez were never near the most popular players list. And while it's just one example of that, I went and pulled the top selling jerseys of those years, and Bryant was like second, third, seventh over a 4-year span, and Baez was like third, eighth, fourth, or something like that. They very much were the most popular players in the sport, and not only has their production fallen off most drastically with Baez, but they're now in situations where you just don't think about them. You never think about Chris Bryant in Colorado, and you never think about Javy Baez in Detroit unless it's in the context of what Jared tweeted, which is like, holy shit, this guy's terrible. He's on a terrible team now, right? Like that's the only time you think of him. And the only time I'm seeing Chris Bryant mentioned is the stat that keeps going around where he still is yet to hit a home run at Coors Field since signing with the Rockies. Like if that's what you're known for now, like I'm so, like, that's not what it used to be. And it's not just the natural decline of a player through age. It's not the same thing as Cody Bellinger, because with all due respect to Cody Bellinger, he was never one of the most popular players in baseball over a half-decade span. Maybe 1 or 2 years, but a half-decade span we're talking about with these Cubs guys. They were front and center for the World Series team. This is not Christian Yelich. Christian Yelich has had some performance-related decline, but A, he was never that level of popular, and B, Christian Yelich is kind of still like in the landscape of the league because he's the most notable offensive player on the Milwaukee Brewers still, even if he's not the same caliber of player. These guys have left to go to other teams that nobody thinks about. Like that's why it's so
with Baez and Bryant too, Jay, they're not a part of any group that is going to be making any sort of noise. So
ever for the rest of those contracts,
your base level of interest now is all but gone, because why are you watching any team if you're not a fan of that team? If they're not making any noise at all, you're not watching them. Great, they've got a star player who was a star back then, and fantastic, but that's all they've got at this point, so nobody's tuning in.
Sorry, and this is the last thing I'll say, but like there was always a fascination, I think, with Baez's offensive game too. Like everybody loved the defense, but there was always this fascination with his offense because it always felt like it was on a razor's edge, right? Because he swung at so many pitches out of the strike zone and had such a high level of swing and miss in his game that like when he's at peak bat speed and peak athleticism, that's going to play, right? But it always felt like when the end came, the end would come quickly. And that's exactly how it's proven to be. It just happened to coincide with the very beginning of his Tigers contract, unfortunately.
Yeah, like it's not a good place to be as a player who is on the downside of production, and you find yourself in an empty parking lot of a organization.
At least with Chris Bryant, he hasn't sucked. He's just signed with an irrelevant franchise and has had health issues. Like he only played 42 games last year, but in his 247 plate appearances as a Rocky, he's hitting .303 with an .821 OPS. But he's just irrelevant because of playing for the Rockies.
Yeah,
and
Javy Baez is more relevant than him just because he's bad.
Yeah, in a 100%. Way, that's true.
And also, like, context is important with Bryant, too, because we were never thinking this way with Baez, but the first 5 or 6 years of Chris Bryant's career looked like we were talking about a future Hall of Famer. We were talking about a generational third baseman, right? Or a generational half third, half left field, whatever. And through 2019, like, he was that dude. And to Jared's point, on a per game basis, still a pretty damn good baseball player. But part of the Hall of Fame trajectory is being on the field too, and that's what's part of what's so disappointing. It looked like he was going to be like a cornerstone guy for a long, long time.
Well, I don't know if you guys watched the Tigers game before the Javy Baez mistake. I know you didn't. Nobody watched it, but I did see the AJ Hinch had an interview where he was like calling out like multiple dumb mistakes. They were asking him like, "What do you think about this? Oh, this player made a mistake." There was like 3 examples of guys making stupid mistakes the day before this happened. Javy Baez forgets the number of outs. It makes it look way worse because of that. So he's kind of fallen on the sword a little bit. Let's be honest. When they signed Javy Baez, people thought it was a good signing because they thought they were going to sign more players and their new players were going to be good. They weren't. Like, you can't blame Javy Baez because the Tigers suck. It has nothing to do with him. But since he got benched, they're 3-0.
I think that's a really
AJ
important
Hinch
point,
had to
though.
make it. I mean, you have to do that.
Yeah.
You have to do that. And Javy Baez, in my opinion, is, I think if we're a little further down the line in the season and he is playing well and he's hit a homer or whatever, I don't know that he gets pulled. But part of me wants to believe that he still does, because if AJ Hinch is understanding of what his role right now in this organization is and what he's trying to do right now, he knows that he has to establish a culture and establish a level of expectation. And that is, I don't care if you're the highest paid player on our team or if you're the guy who's been here for 10 minutes. If you do not do these things, there will be a bell for you to have to answer to. And that is as easy as it gets. So I have no issue whatsoever with what AJ Hinch did. I do believe that there could be some truth to Javy Baez's take about it not being a thing if he was swinging well. But at the end of the day, AJ Hinch has to make decisions that impact tomorrow. And tomorrow being big picture, the future of this club. How do you guys show up today? What mentality do you have? If you think that shit like this is going to be okay, that falls on my plate as the skipper. And I've got to clarify that.
I think Joey's point about the there was supposed to be an infrastructure around Javy Baez when he arrived too. And that infrastructure has almost completely disintegrated before it really even ever existed.